as I can. I did live in the north side. I lived in Stone Oak, and I moved to the east side. And so I have a lot of perspective that is observational, maybe not experiential, if that makes sense. And so with what I say, I hope this is thoughts from the Lord, just not my opinions. But, you know, in our city, we do have this segregation that's happening socioeconomically. We do have these crazy poverty rates. And the sadness for me stems from the fact that in general, our biggest churches are the furthest away from our biggest problems. And that when Megan was talking about the body, our left arm is separated from our right arm. And that there has to be this reconciliation, right? Everyone in this room desires to reconcile people to God and to reconcile people to one another. But the realities of when we leave the room and the biases and the blind spots and the things that we have coming from a place of privilege for many of us really makes it hard to see what are some of the true things that are separating our city and sadly even our church. And so as the church addresses these things, we have to really think about why are the richest churches in general the furthest away from the poorest people. How do we start to restructure and shift this? And the panel has talked about how poverty creates the casualties in our city. And I really think that we have to look at it because at a certain level, it's the power and the privilege at times that create the poverty that's creating the casualties. And so as we look at a system of poverty or a cycle of poverty and generational effects of that, we also have to understand that the root and the cause of that potentially stems from the systems of power and structures that sometimes create those situations of poverty that so many of the people that we love are experiencing. And so that we do have to look at the perfect picture of the church is that there's no need among us, and what are the steps that we need to take, potentially repentance and lament over that first, before we sort of proceed to truly reconcile ourselves to one another and to God.
Thank you very much, Charlie. Power and privilege perpetuate our pain points is a very strong word. Olga, do you want to add anything to that?
I do. I know that we think about poverty as the lack of food and shelter, but I'm coming from the viewpoint as well. I know that you mentioned about me being the regional director, but I'm also a pastor's wife. Been a pastor's wife for 31 years. I live in the community. We minister in the marginalized area of San Antonio. Poverty is just not just lack of food and shelter, but it's also lack of hope within that community. It can be also an empty heart. It can be not being able to make the progress in their life, isolation. So I know that we think of it more as money and shelter, but also, thinking of it as hope. They have lost hope in that area.
Thank you very much. Poverty of hope, security, love. Michelle, do you want to add anything?
Yeah. I think in addition to that, and I'm excited that we're going to get into the root causes of poverty and what roles we have to play.
Will you just take us there right after this question?
Okay. I was gonna, it's something you gotta ramp up to sometimes. I know I gotta ramp up to it. But I do want to address kind of what I feel the church, I want the church to know about poverty. And I think, and where we go wrong beyond the church is really moving from a mentality where I think a lot of us get comfortable in doing the work that either mitigates or seeks to help and assist, sometimes from a space or a mentality of charity. But how transformative would our work be if we believe that we can end poverty? If that's actually what we were trying to do, how would we take up the challenge or the invitation to think differently about the ways that we're currently investing in our communities, and not just from a church-based institution perspective, but individually when we look at our own habits and we look at our own social networks and we look at the own choices that we make for our families and the people that we love. How do all those individual decisions over time build up into the social structures and institutions that isolate others, segregate others, and don't allow others to participate in the wealth and the abundance in our communities in the ways that they could, so that they could not live in poverty, and we can end people from entering poverty over time?
Wow, that's powerful. So moving from program to people, really moving from just having sympathy or even an engagement from a sentimentality standpoint where it feels good, sentimental standpoint, to really systematic transformation. That's a powerful picture and call for us. Olga, where would you begin if you were to take the steps that Michelle just encouraged us to go?
Wow.
Entering the deep impact for breaking cycles of poverty.
Well, breaking those cycles, I know that relief is good and everything, but we tend to stop there. We don't continue trying to help those that are actually in that area, in that need. I use it like a ladder. We need to provide a ladder for them to get out of that. We tend, and I know relief is great and everything, and us as pastors in that community, we're guilty. Because relief is really good and you feel good, but when you try to create programs like after-school programs, when you try to have mentorship, when you start job trainings in your community, that takes work. And that's going to have to take also getting to know other community partners and inviting them to your church to be part of that. It takes work to get them from the relief to being sustainable for themselves. We've seen it these 31 years that we've been in ministry. It's easy. I know we were the ones that we used to give. And there's nothing wrong with giving supplies to the children. But we have to create some other way for the parents, for the families to feel like they're contributing to that family. Mm-hmm. Not always gimme, 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 but how are we contributing and helping those families to feel I'm a father, I'm a mother that's providing for my family. Why not? We can't just stop with the relief that we do with the community. We have to create opportunities for the people to grow, to be able to provide for the families. Now, don't get me wrong. There's some people that don't want the help. Not everybody in those communities wants your help. I've worked with families before that with early Head Start that said, Ms. Rodriguez, I don't want to get out of this poverty. Why? Because it's easy. I lose all my funding. I lose my medical. I lose daycare. Mm-hmm. So sometimes even some programs, are good, but they keep you in that level of poverty.
Thank you very much. The challenge, that ties in with the last gathering, if you were here, where we had Michael Roach from the Chalmers Center talk to us about a potluck mentality. That the goal is not to have a soup kitchen where we have haves and have-nots, but to really create an environment where everybody can bring their best dish to the table. Everybody has dignity, everybody has an opportunity, and to give them the hope to move them from the despair to the dignity. Charlie, you want to add to that? What you all do at SA Hills really has that DNA of dignity restoration in the relationship. What would you add to what Olga says? And then Michelle, if you'll talk about the roots issue.
Yeah, I think it's really tricky what it looks like for us to come in and help in the midst of that and to do it with solidarity and true trust and true relationship. And just to kind of share where I'm at with it in the process is there's some situations happening in our community that I'm essentially powerless to change. And when you sit in a place of power and privilege, like many of us in this room do, you're used to being in a position where you can come in and help and provide resources and do these good works. But to really understand and to be able to relate and connect and build relationship and trust, sometimes you have to be able to sit in a helpless position, in a position where you have no hope other than the hope that God provides. And so I'm sitting in this place coming from I have every privilege that is known in our country, private education, upper middle class upbringing, you name it. I've been going downstream my whole life. It's been really hard for me to fail. And so to sit in a place where you have no power, and your whole identity is wrapped into helping, but you're helpless, I think like that experience is really, I think, important, at least for me, to come in to really understand what it is like to do it with someone, not for someone. Is to really experience, even at a small level, what hopelessness or helplessness might be, to feel a pain and to feel a hurt, and to then in that have such a deeper understanding, right? Because in our marriages, in our relationships, my wife would attest, she doesn't want me to fix her problem, she wants me to understand her feelings, right? And I think that we rush in so quickly with the new strategy and the new way to collaborate, and all good things. I'm not diminishing that, but to really create understanding and relationship and trust by sitting in a moment has been extremely, one, disorienting, but I think will ultimately be transformative in how to do that with someone, and again, transitioning away from the for someone charity mentality.
Amen.
That's beautiful. You get that big picture of moving out of our isolation and insulation into a biblical Christ model of incarnation, where we are working with our neighbors in these neighborhoods. Michelle, what would you add about addressing, I know this is one of your passions, the root of this as leaders in this city at this time?
Right, and I think started trying to collect my thoughts, and after we had our conversation, and so I'm a Virgo, and it is Virgo season, so I made a list, as Virgos are meant to do, and then I got a little carried away with that list, so pardon me here.
Bring it.
Yes, and so, and these guys sent us kind of very easy questions to answer. If our church wanted to make deep impact in breaking cycles of poverty, where would they begin? Well,
Throwing your softball.
yeah, well, the first place I would say is part of the reason we go to church is for fellowship. And so I would say in the pulpit.
Amen.
What are the messages that we're communicating to the members that are trusting their faith and their spiritual development in our pews on a weekly basis? How are those messages aligned with the truth, capital T, and not the truth that's convenient based on where our values are at any given day, or based on what political arena we're participating in at the time? And then I would say in the pews, in what ways are we challenging ourselves when we sit in the pews with our values and our spiritual formation and our ideas of who we are and what we bring to this world? And how are those views aligned again with the truth and what the truth says about what our neighbors need, especially those who may not be comfortable or invited to some of our pews? And the self-transformation that we also have to do as individuals to make sure that we're fully aware of what works when it comes to ending poverty and making sure that that's what we're actually doing. And then two, partnering with those who are doing work that works, not work that works for us, but works that actually end up making the difference that we say we care about. And then investing in what works and what has been shown to work. I think the example that we talked about on the phone was many of us were familiar with the DARE program. And I'm a public health geek, and so I know for a fact that the DARE program was evaluated, and it was supposed to prevent children from using drugs, and it was shown not to work. But at that point, even though when the data showed that it didn't work, it was a program that felt right to a lot of the right people with power and privilege. It was a program that ticked off the right boxes in terms of what we wanted intervention to look and feel like, and it was a program that worked and helped a lot of the egos for many of the partners who wanted to be a part of the program. And so the country continued to invest millions of dollars in something that had been statistically shown not to make a difference. And imagine the damage that we did when we lost an opportunity to actually keep children who are now adults from being addicted to drugs because we chose what was convenience at a time where we actually had the resources to do something different. And so how I felt really invited, continue feel invited by that example to question when I'm doing what works for me. And as a mother of 2 children who has a full-time job, it's very easy for me to slip into focusing on what works for me. I will make a donation after the kids have gone to bed and after I've done this, and then I'm gonna fall asleep and I've done my part. Well, that does make a difference, but what else could we be doing, and what type of self-transformation does that require from all of us to go beyond what we're comfortable with? And then lastly, I will say, and this is something that I know that many churches and many faith leaders are uncomfortable with, but I would say enter the public arena. We are such a great block of people A lot of politicians in our country say that they are making decisions on behalf of our values, and we have allowed that message to corral us into a space that's not challenging a lot of the things that are causing and not reducing poverty in our country. Ending poverty for all of us in terms of aligning our values with the public arena and the conversation there looks like making sure that there's affordable childcare. Right now, we're going to be having a conversation locally about pre-K 4SA and what that does for communities who, and particularly parents who have to work but aren't able to make enough money still, even after working full-time, to afford childcare. So pre-K 4SA is one of our community's response to that. Where is your church on that issue? How are you all discussing being a part of the conversation? How can you enter the public arena? And if you know that affordable childcare is one of the levers that keeps people in poverty, then what's your strategy to join hands and make sure that as a city, we are advancing the public arena to provide for those of us that aren't able to afford it? Entering the public arena means supporting affordable healthcare. We all know that healthcare is a major cause of poverty in this country. It bankrupts families. How are we as a church engaging in the issue of affordable healthcare in our country? Food insecurity, homelessness and housing, affordable housing. There's a citywide conversation happening around what it will take to make sure that people are securely housed, and that the houses that they live in are in great conditions, and that we are building a future where everyone can afford to live in a place where their children have access to a good education, that they are able to come home to safety, that they're able to live in their houses without a fear of being kicked out. How are you as a church engaging in the public arena to advance these policies that end poverty? And those are just some of the examples that will really uproot and address the root causes of a lot of what we're seeing in our community.
Thank you very much for the thoughtfulness of putting that answer. We could talk for hours about that, and I'm humbled to have you all sharing your wisdom, but I really would like to hear from all of you all in the last final minutes of this panel before we have table discussions. I would love for you to talk about the histories, the public policies, the social ills such as racism and other institutional factors, variables, even coming from a place of power and privilege as God's people. What are most important for us to examine if we are going to be more faithful in this space?
Go out to your community. Go out to the people that are in those communities. Don't just read and get the information from a paper. Go out and meet the people in those communities. I know that we want to do a lot of things for the marginalized. We want to do for people in poverty. Go talk to the people. Go talk to the pastors that are in those communities. Don't just assume this is what they need.